Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Jack, back in to bring you our tier list on the easiest healers and the hardest ones for Season 3 Mythic Plus. This list is also going to be based off playing it at a solid level, getting like your 10s and 12s completed without too much of a hassle, maybe healing through some mistakes that pugs are going to throw at you, not for mastering the spec and taking it to a 0.1% level. So if you're enjoying these kind of tier lists, be sure to like and subscribe. And starting it off, we're going to be going into, you guessed it, Resto Shaman. Now, Resto Shaman, and specifically Totemic Resto Shaman, is absolutely one of the easiest healers to start operating at a solid level. The big factor for Totemic Shaman is Surging Totem, which will place down your healing rain for an extended duration. And while it costs a lot of mana, it's super high value because it's also really easy to move around thanks to the Totemic projection talent. So if somebody is walking out of your healing rain, which happens all the time, you can easily reposition it about every 10 seconds, get everybody inside of it every single time. The other big factor is the Lively Totems talent, which causes your Healing Tide, Spirit Link, and Healing Stream totems to all cast full strength chain heals for you at no additional cost. The big factor here is having a huge amount of your output on the 30-second cooldown of Surging Totem and the about 30-second cooldown, sometimes less, for your Healing Stream totems to proc additional output for you without having to take up much extra work. Season 3's Totemic tier set bonus is also proccing additional output for your downpour once you consume all of the whirling motes that are from your hero talent. And so basically these motes are extra buffs for your next spells after you cast a Surging Totem. So you basically just have to cast a Healing Surge and a Chain Heal, which can come from your other totems like Healing Stream Totem, after you place your Surging Totem down. So get a Healing Surge cast off, hit a Healing Stream Totem after your Surging Totem, you'll proc the bonus downpour effect, and then your next Chain Heal is going to be 150% stronger, or a Surge if you needed to do the spot healing. Usually you would use it on the chain heals. This makes it so that as long as you can get a good amount of coverage onto your party with the downpour healing, you are also going to have that cranked up chain heal to quickly push up health pools very quickly. It's very passive and it'll just work off the spells you already want to be utilizing anyway, since most of your casted spells on allies are going to be Riptides and Healing Surges, and then the rest of your casts and healing is deploying totems and having them do a lot of output for you. Much of the gameplay for Totemic is playing around a couple of the different buffs in the tree with talents like Deluge, where you need to have either Riptide on your allies, or they may be in your Healing Rain, and they receive the additional bonus to Healing Surge, Chain Heal, and Healing Wave output. By doing so, you constantly have 15% increased healing onto your allies, and you can very quickly use these totems as emergency buttons as needed to be able to quickly top players off. They've also made a great change going into Season 3, where all of the raid cooldowns, the output cooldowns for healers, things like Tranquility, Divine Hymn, and for Shaman, Healing Tide Totem, all heal for significantly more output. And since you're casting a chain heal automatically, and the Healing Tide itself is very powerful, you have another tool in your toolkit to quickly get people out of danger. Add on to this that as you get more comfortable playing the spec, the Shaman class in general has a wealth of crowd control abilities with knockups, stuns, the lowest kick cooldown in the game. So as you get a better and more solid understanding of how to play the Totemic healing style accurately, the easier it becomes to start working on crowd control and preventing additional damage going out onto your allies. From the start of the expansion, it's been one of the best, if not the best, pug healer to help make up for other people's mistakes around you, and a lot of tools to get you out of danger if you fall behind, and that is going to make it our easiest healer. While I've really been loving Farseer Shaman going into Season 3, and I think it's one of the strongest healers going into next season at the time of this video, I also think it's going to be a little bit more complex, and so I think it'll be a better option for those players who want to be pushing into higher ranks to be going Farseer, at least at this point in time. But if you're just starting off, I would highly recommend that you start with Totemic Shaman, because the fundamentals for playing that spec are going to cross over into Farseer, and while there'll be some more work when you play in Farseer, if your aspirations are to push into higher ranks, that's probably more worthwhile, since the extra work out of Farseer is also going to be giving you an extra benefit as you push into higher dungeons. Next up on our S tier easiest healers is Holy Priest. Now Holy Priest can have a lot of buttons, but once you get into the familiar flow of how you want to use them for a variety of situations, it gets very easy very quickly. The nice thing about Holy is that you always sort of have a tool in your toolkit for whatever is getting thrown at you. Whether you need to do a lot of priority healing, you have Heal, which is getting buffed by your Lightweaver talent. If you need to do some AoE healing, they've been consistently buffing Prayer of Healing, so it's actually a good spell to utilize. The big focus when you're playing as Holy Priest is maximizing both the amount of casts and the uses and how you use your holy words. You have Serenity, which is your big single target heal, and you have Sanctify, which is your ground-based AoE heal, healing everybody in the reticule range. Big focus here is making sure you're weaving between casting a holy word and then casting a heal or a prayer of healing, which will reduce the cooldown of their synergistic spell. So heal as a single target button is going to reduce the cooldown of Serenity, your single target holy word. And same thing goes for prayer of healing and for Sanctify. The focus is going to be weaving between one of those holy word casts and one of those heal or prayer of healing casts to benefit from the big buff that Resonant Words gives you to further amplify your output. The general gameplay for Holy Priest is using your flash shields to build up stacks out of Lightweaver, maintaining 3 or 4 stacks as best as you possibly can, casting a holy word, then consuming one of your stacks of Lightweaver to buff up the healing out of your prayer of healing or your heal, depending on the damage that's going out for your party. You want to be very aggressive with using your Apotheosis, as that can not only be used for healing, especially with some of the talents like Divinity, which are increasing your healing during your Apotheosis and allowing you to cast 3 heals or prayer of healings, which are instant cast and heal for 25% more. When you pair that with the Resonant Words talent, you can absolutely blast tons of output to muscle heal your way through the problems that your party is having. Now, while you don't have an interrupt and your crowd control is on the weak side, you do bring Power Infusion, which will help damage dealers just kill off trash packs much more easily, and the increased stamina is always going to be beneficial for you and your team. You want to make sure you're using that Oracle tier set bonus, as it looks like the best option for Season 3 at the time of this video, to constantly be casting lots of Prayer of Mendings with your Insight charges, which give you cooldown reduction, and then your Piety, which increases your healing and redirects overhealing. You could be really aggressive with your Holy Words, casting them just as damage is coming out, and any overheal gets transferred to the most injured ally, making it much easier to deal with burst damage. The nice thing about Holy Priest, especially going into Season 3, are the hero talent tier set bonuses. Now, if you play Archon, you're going to be getting access to more Halo casts and more increased healing for your Holy Words once you have that Resonant Energy amplified healing buff onto your allies by casting that Halo and having them be hit by the Halo. When you're playing as Oracle, you have a huge benefit out of Prayer of Mending. Oracle's already placing more Prayer of Mending, these charge buffs that are getting placed onto allies that'll proc a heal whenever they take damage. They already apply powered shields when you're playing as Oracle, which adds a little bit of extra health to players. And the tier set bonus is proccing an additional heal effect, which is quite strong. This allows you to be casting lots of Prayer of Mendings as Oracle, and to make sure that you're setting up a lot of healing in advance. So if there's a lot of pulsing damage or consistent damage on a boss fight or on a trash pack, you already have these Prayer of Mendings bouncing, placing your mastery, which puts up a healing over time effect onto them, making it that much more easy to start topping them off with your holy words and your direct healing spells. Like I mentioned for Shaman, all the raid healing cooldowns have been buffed, including Divine Hymn, which is now a respectable oh no button if you ever get into danger. And not only is it a good cooldown on its own, but it also provides a healing bonus onto your allies that stacks as well. So after Divine Hymn is over, you also have that increased healing bonus for quite a while. This makes it even easier to deal with some of the huge damage going out, and you got a major cooldown in Apotheosis to help you muscle heal through a lot of problems that get thrown at you. It can be a little bit difficult understanding the synergies between the holy words and, of course, the cooldown reducing spells like heal and prayer of healing, but once you get into that flow, this is one of the easiest healers to be playing, and is getting into a better spot as well in Season 3. On our A tier, these are healers that are on the easier side, but they're going to need some extra preparation, or they'll have some extra wrinkles getting attached to them. First, we've got got Disc Priest. Now, Disc has been absolutely one of the strongest healers throughout the War Within and Mythic Plus, and I believe they're going to continue around a similar path in Season 3. The reason they're on the A tier is because they have a nice combination of being very easy to get yourself started with in both the hero talent specs, and they also play in very interesting ways. So on the Oracle side, it's dominated Season 2 on account of the huge shields that it puts up on allies in advance. You benefit from this talent called Twin Sight and Wheel and Woe, where you cast more penance bolts onto allies and enemies, and then the additional penance bolts synergize with the Wheel and Woe talent and allow you to put up huge shields on people. Now, they've nerfed the Wheel and Woe talent going into Season 3, but you still have very respectable shield strength, around 25% or so of somebody's health if it doesn't crit. We're only going to be getting more crit and mastery that are amplifying our shield value going into Season 3, and no other healers can put up these level of shields this consistently as Oracle Disc Priest can, and even though they're in a more nerfed position, they are still incredibly powerful, especially when you have to deal with some of the more brutal spot healing situations, since the direct healing out of spells like Penance is also incredibly strong. So you can very easily weave between the atonement healing, where your damage is turning into healing onto your allies, and the direct healing, where you can drop a penance into an ally, provide some emergency spot healing, and top them off very quickly. This is also good synergy with our tier set bonus, which is causing the first bolt of your penance to heal or damage for 200% more. So depending on the situation, you can drop some excellent spot healing on somebody in an emergency, or you can pound it into the boss or trash mobs and help top off the entire party with atonement healing more easily. You have a lot of different cooldowns that can work together to keep everybody safe. Evangelism is a really good oh no button for whenever there's a big burst of damage onto your party and you need to push up health pools quickly. But they've also buffed the raid healing cooldowns in Season 3, and that includes Luminous Barrier. Now, Luminous Barrier has been a very bad ability for a very long time, but it's actually respectable going into Season 3, and something I would definitely advise newer players run with until they're into possibly an optimal group who wants to actually take advantage of standing in barrier. So often in pugs, they don't do it whatsoever, and players will hold on to their barrier waiting for like a perfect moment, and then people don't stand in it anyway. So for pugging, Luminous Barrier is very, very good, providing basically evangelism level healing, but in shield form, which is insane. And so there's really strong value there. Your absorbs that you can provide to your allies are going to be incredibly helpful. You also have abilities like Ultimate Penitence, which got a little bit of a buff going into Season 3, but they're still kind of more of a defensive than it is a very good output cooldown. And you also have your Shadow Fiend and your Oracle Premonitions to cast multiple Dark Penances for extra damage, turning into healing onto your allies to reverse incoming burst damage. And the tier set only gives you more charges of Insight for more Penance cast or more Power Word Shield casts as well. Voidweaver, on the other hand, also is looking much better than Season 2. Season 2, it pretty much fell off a cliff, and Voidweaver is all about lots of atonement healing. This has often been a favorite for many players because of its simplicity, so I would have both the hero talents around the same A level of difficulty to play at a solid level. Big thing when you're playing with Voidweaver is you have about an 18-second cooldown onto your Mind Blast, but it's haste dependent, and a 30-second cooldown onto your Void Wraith. The Void Wraith is going to make your penances dark spells and increase the shadow damage of your abilities. And when you deploy your Rift with Mind Blast in the Voidweaver hero talent, that also turns your Smite into a Dark Smite from Void Blast. And so you pair these abilities together, your shadowy spells are doing tons of damage, and you are able to blast very, very high DPS. That Wheel and Woe talent I told you about, you often are using for Power Word Shield, or almost always when you play as Oracle. But when you play as Voidweaver, you want to be using it for the smites because it's amplifying your Shadow Smite damage, and that is making it that much more easy to push up health bars for all of your allies. Voidweaver focuses really heavy on the atonement healing, and while they're a little bit weaker when it comes to some of the spot healing output, they are still in a very competitive position going into Season 3. They are easy to learn, and I think the power level is going to be very nice for players who are more interested in that atonement-based healing. Next up on our A tier, we've got Holy Paladin. I've played with both Herald of the Sun and Lightsmith going into Season 3. Lightsmith's definitely the easier of the two, as you're basically playing with a melee wings build, focusing on doing damage with Judgment and Crusader Strike to have that damage convert into healing on your allies, using spells like Beacon of Virtue to help with some of the AoE healing, and basically playing a damage rotation that will produce healing. A lot of the challenge there is basically just timing when you want to set up your damage so that you can start just focusing on DPSing almost 100% of the time and then letting that damage convert into your healing. Now, some of the challenges, of course, going to be when you don't have wings up for it, and that's where the spec with both Herald of the Sun and with Lightsmith can have a number of different struggles. Lightsmith has access to their Bulwark and their Sacred Weapon to help provide some additional level of survivability to their allies, where the weapon can have some of the Tempered in Battle, where you're leeching health from your allies to provide it to those more in need, and the Bulwark providing a pretty meaty shield that's also going to stack up over time for some additional survivability. I do think Herald of the Sun is going to be a lot more valuable going into next season. While both specs really like it when players are stacked, in the 5-man environment, you can kind of get around this through some of your beacon gameplay. Lightsmith's been using Virtue, which now has a 40-yard range, which makes it a lot easier to cover all of your allies with the buff and then start doing damage to heal, whereas Herald of the Sun more recently has been using Double Beacon, and that allows them to focus more on single target healing for the players who are most in need, using their spell Eternal Flame, which replaces Word of Glory, to provide that spot healing and then allow the beacons to transfer extra healing onto those allies, and a few talents provide a little bit of damage reduction too. Paladin has some very big strength in both subspecs when they have their wings up, and some very big vulnerabilities when wings is down. The big challenge when it comes to playing Paladin at like a solid level is knowing what to do and knowing how to get around those moments where you don't have access to Avenging Wrath. Now, one of the biggest ways to do that is with the Awakening talent. Using your spenders enough times is going to proc Awakening and allow your Judgment to proc another set of wings for you that you can use to sort of bridge the gap between your cooldowns. Being able to hold on to this for the right moments and knowing when it's going to be coming up at that 15 stack mark is absolutely crucial to playing at a solid level and getting a better understanding of the spec. And when you don't have Awakening or you don't have wings, this is where using things like Blinding Light, Hammer of Justice, your 15-second kick, all come into play to help reduce some of the damage on your group, but also using the wealth of mitigation tools. Unfortunately, Paladin's the only healer that did not get a buff to their 5-man raid cooldown in Aura Mastery, since it doesn't have a healing effect attached to it. That said, it's still a very good mitigation tool if you know incoming damage is coming, or it's likely that it is and you don't have access to healing cooldowns. It still mitigates a huge amount of damage. Your own Divine Shield bubble is fantastic. You can pair that up as needed with Hand of Sacrifice to make sure that you're mitigating more damage either on your tank or on somebody else for your party. There's a few areas for Blessing of Protection, whether it's making sure a melee DPS doesn't rip aggro on pull, or for some of the physical damage hits that are coming on some of these boss fights or some of the trash pulls. It is still a very good mitigation tool on hand. And the more comfortable you really get with using some of these mitigation tools, the easier it gets to get around those areas where you don't have access to wings. Thankfully, a lot of this is solved by just good timing for when you're proccing your Awakening, chaining it with your wings on top of it for longer damage periods, or holding it when you know that there's not much damage going on right now, but in 5 or 6 seconds there's going to be, makes it much easier to sort of bridge the gap. And from there, a lot of the gameplay is focusing on just the basic spot healing as Herald of the Sun, using your Holy Shock for spot healing, for single target healing, and following up with your spender in Word of Glory to constantly manage everybody's health bars. On our B tier, we have healers that have a bit of extra wrinkles getting added into them, and Mistweaver Monk is a fascinating one since I feel like it's one of the easiest healers for new players to heal with on trash mobs, but much harder when you have to heal higher level boss fights. And a lot of this I think is due to the Ancient Teachings buff, which is converting your damage from Tiger Palm, Blackout Kick, Rising Sun Kick, and your Crackling Jade Lightning into healing onto your allies. Now you're going to want to have your Jadefire Stomp buff up through Jadefire Teachings to amplify the amount of healing that you're doing, but what it really results in is that you can pretty much operate in a damage rotation with multiple different abilities producing significant healing onto your allies. The Master of Harmony hero talent and tier set bonus further this goal as well, with the tier set bonus adding more output to your Tiger Palms. And so usually you're using your Tiger Palms to build up more value out of your blackout kicks, to deal more damage, have an easier time with mid or high damage periods. And now, with more output tied to your Tiger Palm, all of your damage abilities are producing really strong amounts of healing in dungeons, and a lot of times when you're fighting trash packs, especially at around like a 10 or 12 level, you can get away with having your Jade Empowerment amplifying your Jade Lightning damage and your Ancient Teachings healing covering most of the damage that happens around that key level. If you needed more output, well, Revival got buffed thanks to all of the other raid cooldowns, making it a very clutch tool, especially if there's any magical dispels that are required. Some dungeons, like in Halls of Atonement next season, there's quite a lot of them, but even in some of the Tazvesh dungeons as well, they will be featured pretty heavily. Being able to dispel all those is absolutely valuable, insanely crucial. And of course you have Chi-Ji, your Invoke Red Crane, which makes it really easy to put enveloping mist buffs on allies and have the enveloping breath buff, which further amplifies your output. So a lot of times, especially on trash, you're just doing a damage rotation and applying a couple of healing spells, and that's covering a huge amount of output. The challenge comes in, I find, whenever you're fighting off boss fights and you need to focus on a lot more priority target healing. This is where Chi Harmony, and a big reason why Chi Harmony actually received a nerf recently, is that by applying Renewing Mist to an ally, you are increasing that target's healing received by 25% now going into Season 3 instead of the 50%. Usually what you would do is make sure you have Chi Harmony on a target. If you're going to take a lot of damage, you'd also put an enveloping mist onto them and start using Vivifies to start spot healing. They've further amplified your Vivify spot healing, which helps out a lot, but I think Mistweaver, compared to some of the other ones, kind of has two different styles of play depending on if you're fighting a single target boss or a whole bunch of trash mobs. Because Jade Empowerment, which amplifies your Crackling Jade Lightning, really amplifies your damage when you're hitting a full 5 targets, and not so much when you're hitting just one, which can make it a lot harder to burst AoE heal or to muscle heal through like priority healing on allies in dangerous situations, which requires you to set up your healing in advance on them to make sure that you're keeping them healthy. This is where a lot of the challenge comes in for playing the spec, and Master of Harmony isn't always as easy to see the healing that's coming from the vitality that you're storing and amplifying your output onto your allies, and so it can feel kind of sneaky of having to juggle multiple different buffs and multiple different modifiers to increase your output when you have to do more than just smash damage buttons on trash mobs. And I think that's where the big challenge comes into it going into Season 3. It's a very fun healer to play, but there's also a lot of different buffs going into it, so make sure you're keeping an eye out for the guides coming out this season, because there's kind of a lot as you get into harder fights. Rounding out our B tier, we've got Resto Druid. Now the spec has a lot of focus on mastery and a lot less on the healing over time, as it's usually been the theme for the spec over its entire history. The mastery is increasing your healing on allies the more healing over time effects that they have, and since your HOTS, especially things like Wild Growth, are really weak in the War Within, a lot of times you need to set up a lot of healing over time effects onto your allies before damage happens, and then follow up with direct healing from spells like Regrowth to actually push up the health bars. You can't just stack a lot of HOTS and just sit back and wait and the HOTS will do the work. It doesn't work that way in the War Within. So as a result, you have to set up a lot of your healing in advance, and you also have to lean really heavily on the Wild Stalker tier set bonus and hero talents to produce a huge amount of output. The big focus when you play as Wild Stalker is the symbiotic blooms. Now the tier set bonus is allowing you during your clear casting, which is giving you the free regrowths, to put out a lot of symbiotic blooms. These are going to be blooming onto your target, providing a huge amount of additional output, and the next bonus is causing the symbiotic blooms to trigger bursting growth, which in most of my dungeon testing in PTR was like 30% of my healing altogether between the symbiotic blooms and the bursting growth. And so anytime that I had clear casting, I'm just slamming down lots of regrowths, spreading out all of these blooms to my allies and getting them all set up. The challenge, I think, comes for the spec in knowing how to best leverage a lot of your mastery, and part of that is with your light bloom usage. Life Bloom is not only a healing over time effect on its own, but it also is going to be giving you extra stacks of mastery onto that target, extra stacks of harmony. And so if you need to do a lot of priority healing to a specific ally or to a specific target, you want to make sure that they have Life Bloom on them in advance as this damage is going to be going out. You also have to balance some of the value out of things like photosynthesis, where the first part of the talent, seeing more periodic healing and getting a little bit faster, sounds nice, but since your hots are such a small component of how you play, you really are only putting Life Bloom on yourself if you know you have to do a lot of priority healing to yourself. The bigger thing is having more periodic heals, more hots on those targets for the additional chance for your Life Bloom to bloom on them, providing a huge amount of extra output. There are some other synergies with things like verdancy, but they're not quite as powerful as they used to be. So a lot of the output and a lot of the focus is making sure that priority targets have Life Bloom on them, and making sure that you're putting up additional hots like Rejuve, or having, Efflorescence down so you can have some of the Spring Blossom hots. There's a lot of just stacking the modifiers and stacking the buffs so that your abilities really do healing. Just like with Monk, you have to do a lot of setup to make sure your spells do healing, and if you don't do the setup, then you're not really going to do that much healing. And I think that's always a difficult thing for newer players to get a good understanding of, and it certainly was something that was more challenging for me when I first started playing Druid as well. Bright side, like we've been talking about throughout this video, Trank is a great button. It's like a super good button next season. It's a fantastic button. It'll really get you out of a lot of problematic situations, and Druid has access to Convoke to start spewing out hots everywhere onto your allies, which is also wonderful when you're in these sort of emergency situations. If you're newer to playing Druid, make sure you are always, and I mean always, using your Nature Swiftness before you use your Convoke, as the additional crit chance from Nature Swiftness is going to apply to any potential regrowths that you are casting during your Convoke. So they both have a 1 minute cooldown. Use Nature Swiftness, use Convoke, profit. Most of the time, Wildstalker gets kind of maligned for having to go into cat form and add extra damage and things along those lines. And while if you have some free time, you should absolutely try to be contributing damage when you can. It's a lot better to go into cat form than to play into like a boomy form these days with how they've changed some of the class talents. So I would highly recommend getting some comfortable keybinds for when you're in cat form. But also, don't overthink it. If you're trying to get like your 10s and 12s done, especially early or mid levels of the season, you don't have to be worrying about healer damage as some make or break thing. This is definitely something you should be worrying about as you get a better understanding of the class and as you get a lot more comfortable with setting up your hots. It can be very nasty and punishing if you're sitting in cat form, adding damage, and suddenly there's a bunch of damage going out. You don't have Trank, you don't have Convoke, and you have to spend 3, 4, 5 globals setting up some healing on targets before you're actually doing output or putting together good output from your regrowths. To wrap up our list, and in a tier of its own, we've got Preservation Evoker. I think this spec is the hardest, especially for new healers, to start getting a good handle on, because it features a crazy amount of setup and additional modifiers that you need to balance in order to make sure your spells are doing the maximum amount of healing. The primary mechanics you have to think about are things like Echo, which replicate the healing spells that you're casting. So if you put your healing over time effect reversion on an ally that has Echo, it will echo a similar reversion depending on the strength for when you're casting it. Some of your spells for a direct Echo cast will be 105% of the strength of that spell. But if you're using abilities like Temporal Anomaly, your Sandball that you're able to spew out, that'll be a reduced strength Echo. And so balancing out how your echoes are being spent, what you're utilizing them on, whether it's hots from Reversion or from Dream Breath or Spirit Bloom, there's a lot of extra setup that goes on with it. The benefit is that you are one of the highest DPS healers going into Season 3, at least at the time of this video. The Chrono Warden hero talent, which is preferred for 5-mans, gives you cooldown reduction for Tip the Scales, which is one of your really strong oh no buttons. Giving it a minute cooldown not only allows you to cast one of these Empower spells immediately at full strength, but it also gives you haste through the Temporal Burst hero talent, which increases your haste and cooldown recovery rate and makes it much easier to get your Empower spells back. Some of the challenge is that a lot of your output is tied to these Empower spells, And if you misuse them, mistime them, don't set them up properly, you can very quickly be in some dangerous situations. Playing Preservation well really revolves around how your understanding is for echoes and additional spell modifiers through things like Grace Period as an example, where you want to have reversion on everybody. Or in some cases, things like Call of Ysera if you want to Burden Embrace before you Dream Breath to amplify the output by 40%. Thankfully, you do have access to a second time dilation through some of the new talent changes. You do have some really strong healing out of Rewind if you get caught into a very unfortunate situation. You also do have some very strong cooldowns with things like Emerald Communion, where if you pair it with Lifebind by putting echoes out onto your allies, hitting a Verdant Embrace, getting this Lifebind buff, hitting Emerald Communion, healing yourself for a huge amount, while also transferring additional healing to allies, you have some very, very potent combos. But also, you need to understand the damage that's happening to set these combos up properly. One of the big downsides with all of this echo usage is that you really lack a good ability to provide some spot healing. So if you're onto a boss fight, you're setting up your healing properly, you got echoes on everybody, but somebody takes some damage, well, you have to find an effective way to heal them, keep them alive before this big damage happens, without also consuming your echoes. So a lot of times what can happen is hitting a Verdant Embrace on somebody early, then triggers the echoes onto everybody else, and you lose out on these buffs or have to place them again if the timing doesn't work out for you. There's also a lot of pressure for setting up your stasis properly, where you need to use, both Dream Breath, Temporal Anomaly, and Spirit Bloom in quick succession in a couple different orders depending on the damage that you're encountering to set up your stasis. Then you get a limited window to spend that stasis before it expires and releases all those spells once again. And so, without timing your abilities properly or using the right modifiers properly, you can really easily waste output and overheal very effectively and not have additional cooldowns at your disposal. Unlike some of the specs, like maybe like Farseer Shaman as an example, you can't just spam chain heal through a lot of your problems. You can't just spam an ability to get through your problems. They did significantly increase the absorb effect out of Temporal Anomaly, and so you could put up some pretty strong absorbs onto people, which help before damage actually happens. But again, that also reinforces that Preservation is one of the most preemptive healers in the War Within, and it's also very punishing if you're not timing these abilities correctly. The knowledge gap between Preservation and some of the other healers is very high. The setup required is also very high, and since health bars can yo-yo extremely quickly in War Within dungeons, the threat of losing out on somebody or potentially wasting a cooldown has a very, very high penalty attached to it. And so, while it's a very fun healer, I also am really hoping that next expansion is going to feature some kind of revamp to make it a little bit more friendly for the setup, or possibly just more rewarding for the extra work that you get as well. So let me know what you guys think of the easiest to hardest healers, and if you have some thoughts on which one might be placed a little bit differently in your opinion. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Hope you all enjoyed it, and I'll catch y'all next time.